Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. Some downstate counties are considering whether to split from Illinois and form a new state. But is the move even feasible?
Once you go on a do not hire list, it can make it near impossible for you to get a job in the city.
Calls to reform the city's do not hire list as the deadline looms to pass a budget. Our Spotlight Politics team on that and more. And from trash fish to gardeners of the Great Lakes, how the Shedd Aquarium is working with a group of community scientists to learn more about suckerfish. Now to some of today's top stories. The Chicago Police Department reports a drop in crime rates across several categories. CPD says there were 36 homicides in November. That's 31% lower than November 2023. Overall, they say homicides are down 9% year to date. They also report shooting incidents are down 18% from last November, and shooting victims are down 20%, the lowest figure in 5 years. In its monthly crime report, the department also recognized Officer Enrique Martinez, who was killed in the line of duty on November 4th, and that 58 Chicago police officers have been shot or shot at while on the job this year. The company that manufactures iconic sweets like Jelly Belly, Lemon Head, and Nerds is facing a lawsuit. Ferrara Candy is being sued by a worker advocacy organization, alleging the Chicago-based company does not make sure temp workers understand the potential risks they face while on the job, violating state regulations. This follows the 2022 death of a temp worker at the Gurnee facility of Maricopa Pizza Company, who attorneys say was told to clean a machine while it was running, and a 2021 death of another temp worker who died under similar circumstances. In a statement, Ferrara denies the allegations and says the lawsuit has no merit. The case also names 2 staffing agencies, and there's more information on our website. Traveling through O'Hare Airport, though, just got a little sweeter. Today, Brown Sugar Bakery opened a location at the O'Hare Food Court in Terminal 3. Its founder, Stephanie Hart, started the bakery in her Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood in 2002 and remarked on how her business has been able to grow.
And in 2016, when we went to Navy Pier, I got the bright idea that I could bake for the entire of Chicago. But I just want to let you know that coming here in 2024 is exposing Brown Sugar Bakery and the Grand Crossing neighborhood to the roar.
The Chicago Department of Aviation cut the ribbon on the bakery's new location today, as well as Veteran Roasters, a local coffee company dedicated to hiring unhoused and at-risk veterans. Despite the frigid temps the last few days, Chicago is actually on track to having its warmest year ever. So far, the city has maintained an average temperature of 57 degrees. To beat 2012's record of 54.5 degrees, December will have to keep an average of a toasty 27.1 degrees. Should be easy, though, considering our typical Decembers hover just over 30. Perfect for a beach day? Some Chicagoans might actually do it. Coming up, some downstate counties are considering a breakup with Illinois. We explain the pros and cons next.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Happy birthday, Illinois. It's been 206 years since the state's founding, but some downstate residents say it's time to create another one. 7 Illinois counties were added to the growing list of those wanting to explore breaking away and forming their own state, signaling their dissatisfaction with what's happening in Springfield and Chicago. Joining us now with more is John Shaw, director of the Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. John, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
7 more counties supporting the referendum. What does this do? What does this mean now?
You know, I think it's an interesting development.
John, I think you're on mute.
I think it's an important development. I think it's interesting. But I do not think it is a cataclysmic development. Frankly, I think it's being somewhat oversold. I mean, these votes, these referendum, I think are largely expressions of frustration. They're kind of tantamount to signaling that they are concerned about people's economic circumstances, some of the cultural battles we've been having. But I don't think there's a real prospect for any of these counties to actually come together and create a new state. It would be, frankly, it's just too hard to do legislatively and constitutionally. But I think it's important for policymakers to pay attention to this because I do think there are some currents of concern and frustration that need to be addressed.
And John, this isn't unique to Illinois. What is driving these movements?
Well, I do think that there's a couple things. I mean, first of all, there's just general frustration with people's lives. I mean, it's been well chronicled. The election showed it pretty clearly that people do not think that the United States is moving in the right direction. They're concerned about the economy. They're concerned about cultural issues. So there's a lot of just overall concern about the circumstances of life. I think with Illinois, there's also the kind of perennial problem that downstate Illinois thinks that Chicago area is too strong, too powerful, too politically connected. And there is this sort of false belief that downstate Illinois is just funneling resources to Springfield that then are funneled to Chicago, this sense of being aggrieved. And I think the economic analysis shows that downstate Illinois is actually doing okay in terms of Springfield and state services, but there is this perception that that Chicago is, quote, ripping off downstate Illinois.
And talk more about that, about the impact of Chicago and Cook County on downstate.
Well, I think there's a perception that, Chicago is the political and economic and cultural powerhouse. The legislative leaders are based out of Chicago. The governor spends most of his time there or much of his time there. So there is this perception that the power in Illinois government resides in the Chicago area and that they have special kind of power and clout in Springfield that allows them to get what it wants and disadvantages downstate. Again, I think the analysis shows that downstate Illinois does pretty well when it comes to the state budget, but that's not the perception down here. And there is this sense of grievance that I think is fueling some of these referenda to create a 51st state.
The last time a state seceded, it was 1860. That is when West Virginia became its own state. And to be clear, that was before the Civil War. Remind us, what are the steps for this to actually happen?
Well, it would have to be approved. I mean, a resolution or legislation would have to be approved by the Illinois General Assembly. Then it would have to be approved by Congress and signed by the president. And under current circumstances, I mean, this new Illinois, as it's sometimes called, would be heavily Republican. So there would be 2 Republican senators. There's no way the Illinois General Assembly with Democratic supermajorities is going to let that happen. Even if it did, when it would go to the Congress, the filibuster is still in place. Democratic senators will certainly filibuster it. So there is no immediate prospect of this happening, or even longer term. I mean, I think this is important only in the sense that it shows the discontent, the fear, the frustration that many feel. And I think leaders in Springfield would do well to just, sit down and have some listening sessions with downstate lawmakers and, kind of political thinkers and thought leaders and try to get a better sense of what the realistic concerns are of people and how they might be addressed. I think that's worth exploring.
Yeah, you mentioned, the process. Obviously, it is rightfully complex, and we've heard other states talking about this, like Eastern Oregon considering joining the neighboring state there. Is this also sort of reflective of an urban-rural divide in the country?
I think so. I mean, I think this is these groups or these parts of the country that are talking about leaving, are largely rural. And I mean, going back into the 1970s in Illinois, in Western Illinois, there was this movement called Forgotonia that began as sort of a prank, but took on a kind of a momentum that I don't think even its originators expected to create a new, I think it was actually then a new country. So I think this is a long story about the disconnect and the divide between rural and urban. It obviously is a profound problem in the United States. And as a society, we need to find a way to bridge these two worlds because the disconnect is very jarring and it leads to political unrest and a lot of reactionary policies. And I think, you have to see these referenda as effectively a reactionary response to frustrations and concerns about the people's daily lives in downstate Illinois.
How should the Democrats, the party in power, how should they respond to counties that are taking these votes, which we know are not binding? But should the Democrats, the party in power, should they be hearing this?
I think they should. I mean, if this won't get their attention, the November 5th probably did. In terms of the Democratic share of the vote in November went down significantly, and I think part of it is discontent with the Democratic base, but also some really anger from downstate Illinois. So I think it just makes good public policy sense for Democratic lawmakers and Republicans to reach out and to have some of these serious conversations about what the state can do, what the national government can do to make the rural parts of the state and country operate more effectively and be a more kind of stable home for people.
Okay, John Shaw at SIU Carbondale, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Up next, our Spotlight Politics team has the latest on the Madigan trial, the city's do not hire list, and that looming budget deadline. With a December 31st deadline looming to pass the city budget, Mayor Brandon Johnson and City Council remain divided over how to close the budget gap. Meanwhile, alders demand reforms to the city's do not hire list. And in the seventh week of the Madigan trial, it was the defense's turn to grill former alderman turned FBI mole Danny Solis. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Nick Blumberg. Hello again, everyone. Maybe the holiday season, but of course there is no holiday from dealing with the budget deadline at City Hall. Heather, where are the mayor and the city council in terms of getting to a compromise?
Well, that's a good question because, as I reported yesterday, Mayor Johnson has said he stopped negotiating the budget in public. So the city council is going to try to pass the budget on December 11th and December 13th. It's a two-step project, but they have somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million-ish to fill, and that's assuming that they raise a tax on computer services leases by 2% to generate about $130 million. So there's a sizable gap left by that refusal of the city council to pass a property tax increase. Now, everyone at City Hall expects some level of property tax, probably tied to inflation over the last year, to be included in the budget, because otherwise the math just doesn't work. But it's not clear what else will be included or if there will be cuts. And Mayor Johnson has said that's his red line. He won't approve a budget that cuts services or lays off city employees.
Okay, it's got to come from somewhere. Heather, we also heard Mayor Johnson, for the first time, he's addressing the firing of his longtime friend and close aide, Ronnie Reese, addressing it yesterday. What did we hear? So
he said that he basically inherited a process and that process was followed, but that he didn't know anything about the allegations against Ronnie Reese until the Chicago Tribune and other news media organizations, including WTTW, requested the file that prompted Ronnie Reese to be fired. Now, we should say that he denies any allegations of harassment or anti-Semitism or misogyny. And the mayor said, look, there's a process, we followed it, I will not allow any of that to take place in my office. But he said he didn't know about it until it sort of broke over the media. And we heard several alderpeople today sort of question about why he appears to have been the last to know about this issue.
Someone who works so closely with
Right.
him. 36th Ward Alderman Gilbert Villegas and 32nd Ward Alderman Scott Wagasback held a news conference outside City Hall demanding reforms to what's known as the city's do not hire list.
There's a lot of inconsistencies around this do not hire list, and it's very, very, very gray. And so what Alderman Wagasback and the rest of us are going to do is put some guardrails around here to make sure there's more transparency around this process.
So Nick, what exactly is the do not hire list, and why were these two mayoral critics calling for changes to it?
Well, this is a long-standing, practice in the city. It's exactly what it sounds like. If someone is fired for serious misconduct, or if they resign rather than being fired or retire, or if it's discovered later that there was some serious misconduct while they were on the job, they are placed on this do not hire list. You cannot appeal it until at least 1 year has gone by. Department heads are supposed to put together, essentially a memo saying, here's what went wrong, here's the supplementary information. But the policy has come under fire because folks say there's just not enough detail there. We don't know enough about what serious misconduct could potentially entail, violating department rules. We don't necessarily have a robust enough appeals process. And this is tied up in, sort of the Ronnie Reese firing. This is not why he is gone from the city, but, he came under fire for pushing out some former Lori Lightfoot staffers and then putting them on the do not hire list for reasons that critics and a lot of folks say were purely political. So all this is coming together in sort of a swirl of what are the right policies that should be in place? How do we ensure that HR at City Hall is actually doing right by folks?
Well, Reese, meanwhile, has at least thus far not been placed on the do not hire list.
I can report that they expect him to be added to that list.
Yeah.
And I've reported that there was a deputy chief of the police that should have been placed on the do not hire list, and for some reason was not, after the city's watchdog found that he engaged in excessive misconduct in August 2020. So this is sort of a black hole of city operations, and it's designed to prevent people who have committed sort of wrongdoing or malfeasance from finding another job with another city department or another city agency. I think what we heard from the alderpeople today is it working as expected?
But yeah, to your point, Amanda, the fact that there were these serious allegations that he did end up, leaving the city and was not initially placed on that list raised, I think, understandably, a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So turning to the Madigan trial, week 7, it was the defense's turn to grill former alderman turned FBI mole Danny Solis. Amanda, how did he hold up?
I mean, he sat there, he had to go under many days, first of direct examination and then the cross. And let's be clear, this is what he had expected and frankly signed up for. If you get out of jail and get to keep in a $100,000 plus pension card from prosecutors, you're going to have to do something for that. And that's in fact what he did, standing up to questioning that really coming under fire for not just what we heard on the tapes and continued questions from defense attorneys as to whether it was ever the former House Speaker himself that was pressuring for a deal or a quid pro quo, and in fact an exchange highlighted where you had Danny Solis saying, you've done so much for me, Madigan, I want to do something for you, and the former Speaker saying, don't worry about it. That was highlighted. But also, I mean, his own indiscretions came up, some we've talked about previously, be it massages or the little blue pill, but also questions about campaign finance violations, potentially tax fraud, potential other areas that he may have sort of come up against the law that he might be embarrassed about. And so really, he went through a flogging on the stand.
Okay, so from the federal courthouse to the state's attorney, during Eileen O'Neill Burke's swearing-in ceremony yesterday at Cook County's top prosecutor, of course, she compared Chicago to a war zone. Nick, what does she plan to do about that?
Well, she announced some new changes to the pretrial detention policy. Previously prosecutors had discretion as to whether they would request that, but now there's a policy in place for certain very serious offenses or very serious allegations. They're going to go after that for defendants who had something like an extended magazine on a gun or a ghost gun. They're going to go after it automatically for domestic violence related cases when there's a weapon involved, for sex assault cases with the victim under 13. So these are the kinds of things that, based on the numbers that we've seen, prosecutors were regularly asking for pretrial detention in a lot of these cases. Now this is the message from the top, and she said this is necessary, as you mentioned, because Chicago is in, what she sees as sort of a war zone with gun violence. We should mention, as we've reported before, homicides, shootings are trending downward, including this year over last. And it's interesting to see because this is the kind of rhetoric that we've heard from, for example, President-elect Donald Trump, who has in fact used those words, said Chicago is about as dangerous as Afghanistan. Certainly she's coming at this from a very different political perspective, but trying to use some pretty strong language to draw the lines around what she thinks her new office needs to be doing.
All right, so former Mayor Rahm Emanuel is back on the political scene a few months before ending his time as U.S. ambassador to Japan. Now, during an interview with the New York Times, he did not rule out a run for chair of the Democratic National Convention and defending his time in Chicago. Heather, what stuck out to you as, his political reemergence? Ian, about 30 seconds.
Well, it was interesting that he was neither asked about nor mentioned Laquan McDonald, of course, the 16-year-old who was murdered by a Chicago police officer. He also defended the school closures that were so controversial more than a decade ago, and he bemoaned the red tape that he had to sort through to build the new Green Line station near McCormick Place. And it was an interesting defense of his tenure in time that I had not heard in many a year, which means we are in for another round of Rahm.
A lot has happened since Rahm Emanuel left Chicago as mayor as well. That is Spotlight. Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, Nick Blumberg. Thanks, team. Up next, a so-called bottom feeder gets their own spotlight. Rough fish, bottom feeders, trash fish. These are just some of the nicknames for suckers, the most abundant group of migratory fish in the Great Lakes. But this much maligned fish is actually super important to the health of our ecosystems. A Shed Aquarium scientist has recruited a team of volunteers to help her learn more about the sucker's life cycle, and along with collecting data, they're helping her change perceptions about this fish. Our Patty Wetley joins us now with more. Patty, first tell us about suckerfish and the role they play in the Great Lakes.
Well, they're not lampreys, which somebody mistook them for. They are a native fish in the Great Lakes, and that rough designation means that they're not a game fish like trout or walleye that people actively want to catch and eat. But as you mentioned, they are super important to the ecosystems because they are that migratory fish that moves every spring from the lakes into our streams and creeks, into the tributaries, and they act like little gardeners, fertilizing the stream beds, and they also serve as prey for other larger fish, birds like eagles and osprey, and even wolves. So they're a vital part of the food chain.
They do a lot of work, serve a lot of purposes.
They do a lot of work, yes,
like.
exactly.
Yeah. So a Shed scientist is working to change the narrative around suckers. How are volunteers helping her do that?
Yeah, so Dr. Karen Murchie at the Shed Aquarium, because of that designation, what they've been labeled, and they're not as valued as a game fish, there hasn't been a whole lot of studies done on them, and we don't know very much about them. And considering how important they are, we don't know what threatens them or what their vulnerabilities are. And one of the most important things that we need to know is what triggers that migration. So that's what Dr. Murchie has been studying, and because she can't be everywhere at once, she needs all of these volunteers to monitor streams basically from the north suburbs of Chicago up to the tip of Door County, along Lake Superior, and she has them, every day going out to their assigned station and checking. Are the suckers here yet? Are the suckers here yet? Noting all of the conditions, and then when do they actually show up?
All right, I'm sure that'll be fun for those who are watching to
Yes.
come in with that report. So in these 8 years of collecting data, what are the findings and what do they mean?
So after going through all of this data, temperature is a huge cue. Precisely, they determined the precise temperature, which is 43.3 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the water temperature in those creeks that the suckers are like, all right, time to go reproduce. And actually on top of that, what the volunteers have also done is while they're at their sites, talking to all the people who are like, what are you doing? And they're telling them all the things that I just told you about suckerfish. So multiply Dr. Murchie by all of the volunteers she has, plus me, plus you. Now get the word out about suckerfish, not a trash fish.
Spreading the word. 43.3 degrees. Not a tenth more,
They're like,
not a tenth
on your mark, get
less.
set, go. Spawn.
Okay, 15, 20 seconds left, Patty. What is next for Karen Murchie and the volunteers?
Well, now that they've got that temperature, it's like, what else might go along with that? And is there a potential for a mismatch between when they're ready, if the water gets warmer earlier, than when plants and other things are ready to take up those nutrients that they're bringing? So again, it's this whole intricate web that we're only just now starting to actually take a look at.
All right, very interesting. Suckerfish, Patty Wetley, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. We're back with more right after this. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. From seasonal markets to ice skating, there are a lot of options out there for getting in the holiday spirit. So check out our Instagram at WTTW Chicago for a rundown of 5 Christmas classics. And visit our website for more holiday events happening across the area. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and a special time 11. How 2 local anti-violence advocates use basketball as a tool to talk through past pain. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to give back to its community in Chicago and beyond.